My name's Bryant. I'm a real alcoholic. By God's grace, because the program of Alcoholics Anonymous works in my life a day at a time, I haven't had a drink or a substitute for a drink since the day I came back to Alcoholics Anonymous. That was Christmas Day of 1960. And for this, I'm eternally grateful for this way of life, because when I got here, I told you that I was a real alcoholic. And I don't know of very few that ever returned from where I was. I don't know many that recovered from the state of mind and body that I found myself in at that particular time. So I'm eternally grateful just to be breathing in and out. But to have found the way of life and to find what I have in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, it's tremendous. I used to wonder an awful lot why I was given this opportunity. Why didn't my friends have the same thing, the same opportunity that I had? And then I started learning about the disease of alcoholism early. I started learning about the effect that it has on the body and mind, and I started studying my friends, and I don't wonder why anymore. You learned me about God's grace and about mercy, and you learned me how to do some things myself, and you learned me how to work, and I don't need to know anything else. I don't need to question anything about what God's plan is for you. I just am grateful tonight that he had me in his plans and that I'm a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. Now, I didn't want to be an alcoholic, I'll guarantee you. I did not want to be an alcoholic worse than anybody I've ever known in my life. Because, you see, my daddy was an alcoholic. And my daddy was a good man, but alcohol ruined him. And I did not like what it did to my daddy. I did not like what it did to our family. I didn't like what it did to me, and I said, I'll never drink. Never. But I got to tell you about the kind of kid I was. I'm going to try not to stay drunk tonight, you know. We get up and we say, I ain't going to give you a drunk-a-log tonight, and then immediately we go ahead and give a drunk-a-log. Usually when people fall in a deep, dark hole and come out, they tell you how they get out. You know? Hell, we do it a little different around here. Tell you all the way about the trip to the bottom. If we have time left, we said, yeah, I got out. But I hope I can tell you something tonight and have a chance to tell you something about the miraculous program of recovery. So, you know, I got to tell you how really screwed up I was before I ever took a drink. You know, alcohol can't take all the blame for my condition, because I was born nuts and of nutty parents, nutty descent. Everybody in my family is flaky. I want to tell you the kind of kid I was. You know, my daddy was a tobacco man. He was a very capable man. He's capable of making a lot of money. More capable of spending it than he was making it, because he was an alcoholic. And I knew how much money he made, and I knew how much money the other kids made. I knew that. And the other kids had a new bike, I had a rusty one. And I didn't understand that. It was very frustrating to me. This is one instance, but there was a lot of frustrations in my life that indicated and told me as an individual that they didn't love me. And it was very frustrating. And these frustrations led eventually to resentments, and the resentment led to hate. So I was very frustrated as a child. Our family lived in a state of anxiety at all times. Never did we come out of that state, because our lives revolved around a practicing alcoholic. And what he wanted done, we did. You know, we'd fix supper at night and wait for him to get there. And if he didn't get there, we didn't eat. That's sick. You know. And we'd sit there and wonder where he was, and when he'd get there, we'd say, what the hell did he come home for? You know? Never knew when he was coming home, if he was coming home, who he'd bring with him, what kind of condition he'd be in when he got there. So we lived in a state of anxiety. Nothing was ever settled at my house. There's a lot of fear in my life at an early age. I was afraid of everything. I was afraid of what was happening now, what had happened, and what was going to happen. And I was always afraid that there was something bad going to happen. And I'd tell you about it 2 years, and when it finally happened, I said, I told you so. A lot of fear early in my life. I never was satisfied. You know, I never was satisfied with my position in life, never was satisfied with how I looked in my appearance, never was satisfied with my friends. I just never was satisfied with anything I had. I'd go to the store and I'd buy a blue suit and I liked it and I got it home and looked at it for 5 minutes and I'd said, why didn't I get the brown one? You know, I was just that kind of guy. I wasn't satisfied with anything I had. So I guess it's a blessing I didn't have a hell of a lot. I really would have been dissatisfied. Had another thing wrong with me, too. I was the biggest liar that ever lived. I didn't start lying after I started drinking. I started lying right after I started talking. Became real good at it. I practiced it. Yeah, I had a lie for any occasion. When to make me look better, you look worse. Whatever seemed the necessary thing for me to tell at that particular time, I did. And so I became real good at lying. So, you know, you can take a kid with this kind of an emotional makeup, and he's got two chances. He's either got to be an alcoholic, he's going nuts, completely nuts. But I said I wasn't going to never drink. Never was going to drink, and didn't until I was 15 years old. Long time. Hell, I was early back then to start drinking. You know, they don't... You know, these old timers now, they're in AA by the time they're 15. But I was at a party one night. Everybody was having a good time but me, and I told myself when I went there I wasn't going to have a good time. Usually when you tell yourself that, that's what happens. But I looked around at everybody there, and they had some big jugs of wine. I mean big jugs. Wine everywhere. And I kept looking at those bottles, and it said wine. And I looked everywhere, wine. I didn't see any hard liquor in the whole thing. Everybody was having a good time except me. They were drinking wine. I was opposed to hard liquor. And you look at it long enough, and you are envious enough of these people that are laughing and having a good time, and unless you are something special, you're going to pull out a little glass of that wine. And I did, about that much, and I threw it on down, and it tastes pretty good, and it felt even better, and I had another glass of wine before it went around to everybody else. And when that second glass of wine went down, things started happening in my life. They really did. I wasn't afraid anymore. No fears at all. I wasn't bashful anymore. All this anxiety was gone, and I could carry on a conversation, and I made more sense than anybody else, and I felt real good about me, feeling better than I'd ever felt in my life. But I wanted to feel just a little bit better. And I expect that's why we're all here tonight. We just weren't satisfied with feeling good. We had to feel a little bit better. And I started using this mathematical mind of mine, bordering on genius. I said, if 2 drinks will make you feel this good, 4 will make you feel twice as good. Well, usually something like that works out that way, but we're dealing with alcohol. And it's cunning and baffling and powerful. And it doesn't formulate out like other things do. But somewhere that night between 2 and 4, I got in trouble. Couldn't handle the amount of alcohol that I took into my system when I started to drink the very first time that I drank. I blacked out that night, walking around, doing things, not remembering them. I passed out that night. I woke up the next day, or came to, or whatever you do, and I was sick. I mean sick. Sick. But it's the most peculiar type of sickness that I've ever experienced in my life. You ain't never experienced anything like it either. You see, when you're that sick and you feel like you're going to die, you call Mother and said, how about fixing me? Hell, you don't call Mama and tell her that I'm drunk. Fix me. You don't tell your friends that you're sick. Because you see, I was already thinking in my mind how I was going to control it the next time I drink. I wasn't going to drink twice quite as much, and I was just going to drink the right amount. So you can't tell your friends about this sickness either. The conversation would go about like this. He said, I drank something last night that damn near killed me, and I can't wait to get some more of it. You don't tell them that, you know. So you just stay sick and hope you're going to get better, and you do. And you do. It's a very, very peculiar type of sickness. But I had, for 15 and a half years, I was opposed to alcohol. One night I drank, and I liked the effect produced by it. And it controlled the rest of my life. Don't tell me that alcohol is not powerful. Don't tell me that your alcoholic thinking cannot start immediately. Mine started right then. And I said, there's got to be some way, some amount, some type of alcohol that I can drink and not make me sick. And I pursued that to the gates of insanity and death. I pursued it until the day that I came back to Alcoholics Anonymous. And I never recaptured that feeling again in my life. I never did experience that warm, invigorating glow that made you feel like you were on top of the world. Never did experience that again. I felt like from time to time I said, this is it, tonight is it. It's going to be like that, and 30 minutes later, hell, I forgot, you know, just in oblivion. But I never did. Never could control the amount of alcohol that I took into my system once I started to drink. I was different. I was different. I didn't drink like my friends. My friend says, I've had too much to drink. I think I'll go home. I'd go to town when I had too much to drink. That's when I started getting in trouble. You just don't go to town when you've had too much to drink. And I started getting in trouble, and my friends were not getting in trouble. And it started me thinking a little bit, not too much. I didn't think in depth about it a lot. You know, I said, wonder why. You know, wonder why they don't get in trouble and I do. I didn't know what was wrong with them. I did a study of them. I was smarter than every one of them. Had a better job than any of them. What was different between us? You know, what was the difference? And every one of them was married and they had families. They had responsibilities. I said, by God, that's it. They are responsible family men and you are a playboy. And if you had the responsibilities that these guys did, you would spend less time drinking and devote more time to your responsibilities, and you could live a balanced life like they could. I thought that was the answer. I really did. I thought that was the answer to my problem. If I had responsibilities, I could control my drinking. So I got some responsibilities. Hell, I didn't handle aim as well as I did booze. I was going to handle an irresponsible person with more responsibilities. But I did, what you're supposed to do. Long about then, if you were going to have a family, it was real popular to get married. Real popular. And so I found this girl, and we were going to get married, and went to my family doctor. And I told him, I said, we're going to get married, we're going to get a blood test. He said, have a seat, I'll be with you in a few minutes. And he was with me in a few minutes. But I want to give you some advice. Don't ever get a blood test. This is where it all started. This is where all the trouble started in my life. This family doctor of mine that we trusted through the ages came in to give us a blood test, and he started talking about alcoholism. He'd been to Rutgers or Yale or somewhere, and he knew everything there was to be known about alcoholism, and he told me more than I wanted to know about it. I was trying to figure out what had happened to him. Maybe he's getting a little senile, He started telling me about a place for alcoholics that he had on the edge of town. He treated alcoholics out there. I said, big deal. What's that got to do with a blood test? Finally, he got around to telling me what he wanted to tell me. He said, I've observed your drinking habit and pattern over the past few months, and I'm of the opinion that you're an alcoholic. Certainly a serious problem drinker. And if you can stop now, you've got a lot of productive years ahead of you. And if you don't stop now, I can't promise you anything. Hell, I hadn't asked him to promise me anything. I came in there for a blood test, and now we go through all this hassle. So I told him, I said, if you just give me that paper that I came in here for, and I'll be on my way, and if I ever need you, I'll call you. Real smart-like, And I called him. I had to call him, yeah. I did real good now. Don't get me wrong, I did real good there for a few months. Real good. I didn't drink anything but beer. Awful lot of it. But I didn't drink anything but beer, and that's the hardest work I've ever done in my life. I'm going to tell you. That is hard work. You have to get up early in the morning and start popping those cans and drinking just as hard as you can to get a buzz on by noon. And by the time you start feeling pretty good, you're so tired from opening those cans and going to the bathroom, you can't enjoy it. So what it amounts to is a 24-hour-a-day job to stay drunk. That's hard work. I heard a guy talk a few years ago that never had drank anything but beer. My God, it made me tired listening to it. I said, you poor thing, you've never been in the fast lane in your life. I stood that as long as I could. I stood as long as I could. I mean, it's just getting where it was just overbearing, getting so big I couldn't get around, Had that old Milwaukee tumor sticking out there. And I needed to be drunk fairly early in the morning, tell you the truth about it, get on about my business of drinking some more during the day. So I got back on the hard stuff again, Drinking around the clock, living to drink, drinking to live. I don't have to tell you about it, It's necessary drinking. And I started listening to people. They won't mind their own business. They just talk about what you do and where you go and some of your manners. I despise that. But they were talking more and more, and I was drinking more and more. And things were working out less and less. And one day it came to a head. Everywhere I went, my drinking was the topic of conversation. I couldn't escape it. Went to work and they said, why don't you quit? Got mad, came home. My wife says, why don't you quit? I got mad with her. Went to my mother's. That's where all grown men go. My mother said, why don't you quit, son? I got mad with her, and I went to get another drink, and the guy wouldn't sell me one. He said, why don't you quit? I said, my God, it looks like I'm going to have to. There's a conspiracy going on. You know, if you can't get a drink, you might as well quit. Well, it was Monday. That's a good time to quit. That's a good day. I wasn't going to get a drink. That was a good reason to quit, but there wasn't but one thing wrong. I never had quit before. I didn't know a thing about quitting at all. None. I'd been clinically drunk ever since when I was 17 years old, you might as well say. So I didn't know anything about quitting. I just knew that you didn't drink if you quit, so I quit. And it was obvious enough that I went in a public restroom, and a guy that I'd never laid eyes on in my life said, man, you need to get off that booze. You're in bad shape. Can you imagine that? Never seen him before in my life. So I said, well, I'll quit anyhow, you know. But as Monday grew longer, I grew shakier. And when my wife got home from work that afternoon, I wasn't shaking anymore. I was vibrating. I looked like one of these paint shaking machines. And I said, call that doctor. You know, I thought I was flying apart. I said, call that doctor that I insulted. She said, you call him. I said, I can't dial the phone. And I apologized to the doctor. She finally dialed it, and I apologized. I said, if you'll come over right away, I need some help. So it seemed like an eternity, but he finally got over there, and he gave me a couple of shots. And the next day, he carries me out to the funny farm to sober up. Got my first experience at drying out. He made it easy for me. He eased me right on down. He put me out there with 12 old men. Hell, they was old as dirt. They fascinated me. They fascinated me to death. They knew everything. There was not a question. They didn't know how to manage their own life. Hell, they didn't know a thing about that, but they knew everything else. You could ask a question and you'd get an answer in a minute, you know. And they fascinated me today. And it's still like that today. I work in one of those places today, and if you want to know anything, hell, go out there and ask. They'll tell you. Might not be right, but you'll get an answer. Drive your car up and open the hood. You got 10 mechanics out there in a minute. They'll tell you exactly what's wrong. Theirs won't run in, but they'll get yours to run. Now, I listen to these wise old men, and I learned an awful lot. I learned how to stay drunk better than I'd been doing. You know, I learned that there was places that you get. I learned all about pills, Nals and Talls. I learned all about them, uppers and downers. They told me how to take them, too. You know, they said, now you take these pills during the day, and they'll pick you up. And they can't smell them on your breath. And if you want to take a drink or two at night, that's your business. And that sounds good to somebody that don't want to quit drinking. That sounds real good, so I came back out. And I started taking those pills during the day and drinking at night, and it worked out fine for 2 or 3 days. Then I got my days and nights mixed up. I got the pills and the booze mixed up, and I got my wife and some other woman mixed up. Hell, I didn't know anything about it. You know, I was just following directions in a blackout. And it lasted a long time, I know that. It lasted a long time. We can make a long story short here in a few minutes. I went to all these places. First, they were pretty nice drying out places. And then they were less affluent, you know. And hospital wards, state mental institutions, jail. It just seemed, everything seemed to be going downhill, and as long as somebody, bottom line is, as long as somebody got me sober, I got drunk again. It's that simple. It was that simple. That particular time, I ended up in our state asylum. That's what they called them back then. That's the only place they had to send you, was to this state asylum. And I went over there, called Dix Hill. And I stayed over there and went in that little sport coach for a few days. That was a humiliating experience. You lay there like this and everybody walks by and looks at you and nobody says anything. I know now why they don't say anything to you. Because you never give them an answer that makes any sense. I finally said after 5 days, good morning to one of the nurses. She liked to broke my arm getting that straitjacket off of me. And then I started playing games with them. I started telling them we was going to skip Tuesday this week, and next week Saturday'd be gone and stuff like that. And they observed that, and your average run-of-the-mill alcoholic gets out of there in 28, 30 days. And 35 days later, I was still there, wondering why I wasn't discharged. And they told me, said, look, you're here up to 90 days, contingent upon your progress. And then we can renew that sucker. I could be over there yet, talking like that. Hell, that's what they got places like that for. It's for people that was talking like I was talking and doing like I was doing. I went to the doctor over there and told him. I said, look, I've been playing games with y'all. They said, well, we were just wondering about that. So I started telling him what he wanted to hear, and hell, I was out of there in 4 or 5 days. But I could still be over there. But while I was there, I heard about Alcoholics Anonymous. Didn't go, but I heard about it. And when I got home, something bad had happened. My wife had heard about Alcoholics Anonymous. And she said, while you were over there, they never call the name of the place that you're at. Do you know that? Had Betty Ford and son, they said, while you were out there. And I know why they don't call the name. Hell, they're ashamed of it. While you were over there, she said, I heard about Alcoholics Anonymous. I said, well, I did too. She said, good. I want you to go. Or go. And I said, I was planning on going. She said, they'll be here in 10 minutes. It was a setup. It was a setup because they were there in 10 minutes. And they walked in my house, 2 guys. I knew one of them. He's a bad drunk. Worse than I was. He was worse than I was, and I knew I couldn't quit. I knew I couldn't quit. But he was a worse drunk than I was. He was kind of, his face just got blood red, dark red, and had those blue veins running all through. It looked like a road map. And his eyes were yellow. No pupils, just yellow. And he's walking in my house and he's got a new suit on. His face ain't red, just pink, just sort of flushed a little bit. No veins running through his face, clear. He's got eyes, they're blue. But I knew he couldn't quit drinking. I knew he couldn't quit because he was worse than me. But he looked good, and I said, by God, he's found something. He's found a way to drink and not be sick. I'll go with Ham anywhere. And so here I go with old Ham to the AA meeting. Going to learn how to drink and not be sick. And that's what I told him that first night that I went. I said, I want to learn how to drink and not be sick. He said, shut up. Now, I thought that was fairly rude. My first time, Hell, you didn't hear back then that the newcomer was the most important person in the room. They didn't know it back then. They knew how to tell you to shut up. And they started talking about sobriety. One guy had been sober 90 days. I knew that was a lie. You couldn't stay sober 90 days. Another guy said he hoped he stayed sober the rest of his life, a day at a time. I almost threw up. The rest of your life? Hell, I might have lived to have been 35 or 40 years old. And I couldn't imagine living that long without a drink. I said, my God, what's wrong with these people? But they explained the disease of alcoholism to me that night. They explained the progressiveness of the disease of alcoholism that night in a manner that I've never heard before or since. I have never heard a professional, I have never heard a lecturer that does that for a living explain the disease of alcoholism any clearly than I heard it from that group of people that night. They explained the elevator process to me. Alcoholism is like an elevator and it's going down. And you can press a button and you can get off right now. You don't have to go as far down as some of us did. Our experience tells us that you don't have to do it if you will just listen. And I understood the disease of alcoholism. I understood it, but I could not accept it in my life because, you see, I had already agreed and I had told myself that I was an exception to the rule, that somehow, someday I was going to control my drinking. And my book tells me that's the obsession of every abnormal drinker, that somehow he's going to do it, and I just knew that somehow I was going to do it. However, out of fear and fright and threat, and a lot of emotional appeal, I didn't drink, and I went to 7 or 8 meetings. Those people were relentless. They were everywhere. They wouldn't leave you alone. I would be working in the store and turn around and one of them said, how you getting along, Bryant? I started in the liquor store one night, and one of them says, where are you going? You finished eating at night, and there was no need to look out the window to see if they were there ready to go to the meeting because they were there, ready to go to the meeting. You just walked out the door. You didn't look to see if they were there. And I went to the meetings, and I saw that these people had nothing to gain from me, that they were concerned about me, and that concern was genuine, and I couldn't look them in the eye because I knew, I don't care how sick you are, and I don't care how drunk you are. If you look a genuine person in the eye, you can't look at him long. You got to drop them, and I had to drop my eyes, but every once in a while I'd glance, and they were all sincere. Sincere eyes, when you're insincere, bug the hell out of you. I'll tell you that right now. They're always on you. I heard the eyes of Texas are upon you. Hell, the eyes of sincerity are always on you when you're insincere. And they were on me. And finally I said, I got to get away from these people. I got to do some things my way. I got some things that I want to do. And I went out and I did some things my way. And the only person that I've ever known that was successful at doing things his way was Frank Sinatra, and that was in a song that he sang. I understand he's got stage fright now. He got over it. But I did things my way, and everything went to hell in a handbasket. I can explain it to you with one word. It was hell. Everything disintegrated right in front of my eyes. I lost a business, and I lost a family, and I lost a home, and I lost my friends, and I lost my standing in the community, and I lost my respect, and I lost self-respect. And I was a person that had nothing on the inside except garbage, and I was a walking zombie. Nothing mattered to me but another drink. God, that's a hell of a life, my friends, don't tell me that alcohol is not powerful. Don't tell me it's not, because I had a chance to keep a business. It was a good business, and I lost it. I had a chance to keep a family and a home, and I wanted that, but a drink was more important, and I lost it. And I lost all the principles that were taught to me by my grandfather. He was the only one in the family that had any damn sense at all. And he taught me some principles, and they were the same principles that I learned in Alcoholics Anonymous. The principles of honesty, the principles of unselfishness, and purity and love. He taught me these things as a child, and I found myself one day sacrificing the principle of honesty. And it hurt right here. And I said, God, what did you do that for, dummy? And I couldn't answer why I did it. But I did it again, and next time it didn't hurt so bad. And the next time it didn't hurt so bad, and soon it didn't hurt at all. And when it doesn't hurt at all, that means you have no principles to live by. And when you have no principles to live by, my friends, you have very little to live for. And that's the condition that I found myself in. I couldn't drink, and I couldn't quit. And I couldn't live with alcohol. I couldn't live without alcohol. I had nothing to live for. I had nobody to help me live. And I was just an absolute zero. I'm not proud of that. I found myself in places that I ordinarily wouldn't frequent. And I said, what are you doing here? I couldn't answer that question. But I was back the next day. And the next. And soon that became a hangout of mine. But I don't know why I was there in the beginning. I found myself associating with people whom I ordinarily wouldn't associate with. And I said, what are you doing with this bunch of yo-yos? I didn't know. But I was back with them the next day, and they became friends of mine. I couldn't explain why I was with them in the beginning. No explanation whatsoever. So alcohol is a powerful force. Caused me to do things that I didn't want to do with people that I didn't want to do it with and didn't want to be with. For no reason whatsoever, I was doing it. And all the time I was destroying myself and everything that I loved and everything that was about me. And I couldn't see it. I came to one day. I found myself on Skid Row in my own hometown of Durham, North Carolina, panhandling on the streets for another drink for my former business associates and friends and schoolmates. And this was a way of life for me for about a month or so. I don't remember how long. Nothing mattered except another drink. And I came to one morning in that little room that I had, and the bells were ringing loud, often. Hell, they rang every day, but they were more often and louder today. It was Christmas is what it was, and I didn't know it. Had no idea that it was Christmas. All I know is that I heard here and all over. And I had a pint of 100 proof, and I said, that'll do it. And I drank the pint of 100 proof, and the more I drank, the worse shape I was in. And when I finished, it hadn't done a thing for me except worsen my condition. And I panicked. Utter panic. I said, my God, what am I going to do? It's not doing the job for me anymore. And I fell to my knees and I said, God, if you'll help me one more time, if you'll help me one more time, I'll do what you want me to do. Now, I'd bargained with God before. You do this for me and I'll do that for you. But I didn't have any bargaining power this day. I said, God, if you'll give me one more chance, I'll do what you want me to do. And that was Christmas Day of 1960. And by His grace, I haven't had a drink since then. I went to a place that was a farm for alcoholics. Non-medical. No medicine. In worse shape than I'd ever been in my life. I couldn't recall or remember anything for 12 days, DTs. I couldn't fill out an application. I remember the guys periodically sitting on me to keep me from shaking the house down. And finally, after 12 days, I came to. And I had a clear thought. And that clear thought was, I don't ever want to be as sick as I've been. And I had a second clear thought. And they were those eyes of the people in Alcoholics Anonymous. And I said, if I live, I'm going back to Alcoholics Anonymous. And those two thoughts have not left my mind. Every morning upon awakening, my first thought is how sick I was, and I don't ever want to be that way. And my second thought is where my help comes from. And I don't ever want to repeat what I've done. And I don't ever want to forget what's been done for me. I went to Alcoholics Anonymous from that treatment facility with a suit on that was 20 years out of style. It was all I had, and they gave it to me there. And I presented my body to Alcoholics Anonymous. And nobody says, hey, nice threads there. You know, nobody asked me where I got my suit. They didn't ask me for any credit cards. They didn't ask me anything. They did ask me one thing. And back then, you had to have an honest desire to stay sober. And they said, do you have an honest desire to stay sober? I said, I do. They said, are you willing to follow directions? I said, I do. They said, we're glad to have you in Alcoholics Anonymous. And that's all that was asked of me. Some of us, when we get here, are sicker than others. I'd listened to a speaker in those early days, and I said, man, he was tremendous. And then I'd get outside the room, and I said, what did he say? And I couldn't recall. You know, some of these wires were burned out here. But I kept coming back to the meetings. I knew just enough. I knew where the meetings were. I knew what nights they met. I knew that you were staying sober. And I knew that if I kept coming and didn't drink, by God, I'd stay sober. And I don't think you need to know any more than that when you first get here. We get some that first get here now that know an awful lot. One at my home group, not too long ago, had been to a treatment center. Sober 28 days. They told him, they said, you had the equivalency of 1 year. I told him, I said, I'm going to tell you something. And I want you to listen to what I have to tell you. If you have 28 days of sobriety, you have 1 day more than somebody with 27 and 1 less than somebody with 29. We do it at the time in Alcoholics Anonymous. And that's the way that it was when I got here. And if God gives me strength to be 100 years old, that's the way I'm going to leave it. Because that's all I've got is today. But I presented what I had to Alcoholics Anonymous. And that's what you asked me. And I had a monumental desire to stay sober. And tonight it's stronger than it was then. It's stronger than it was then because then I had nothing to lose. Absolutely nothing to lose. And tonight I have an awful lot to lose. So my desire to stay sober is stronger than it was then. And I came to Alcoholics Anonymous, and if I'd have come to get that big job, that's bad news. I didn't get the big job. I got a job working as a butcher at the same place I owned at one time, making 1/3 as much as I was accustomed to making. That'll do something for your ego. But you know, I found out that if you're not a big shot, it don't take a hell of a lot of money. And my money went where it was supposed to go because I'd been restored to sanity. So if I came to get the big job, bad news. If I came to get my wife back, bad news. I told my sponsor, I said, it's easy for you to stay sober. You know, the group assigned me a sponsor. That's a tough way to get one, baby. Pick you one out. They assigned one to me, and I'll swear he's the hatefulest man that God ever made. Old Tom back there knew him. I told people in the group, I said, I hate him. They said, hell, everybody hates him. He was right, though, and he'd been sober as long as God, and I couldn't contest that. I said, it's easy for you to stay sober. You got a wife and family, and mine's gone. I got to have my family back to stay sober. He said, the book don't say that. That's the first time I read the big book to prove him out of lie. And it says wife or no wife. I believe that's specifically what it says. That my sobriety was not dependent upon people, it's dependent upon my willingness to trust in God and clean house. So my wife ain't back. I don't believe she's coming back. I got a little impatient about 25 years ago and married a girl in AA. But I didn't get, the things didn't happen to me fast. And, I heard the speakers talk about these gifts, these fringe benefits. I said, hell, I want some of them. Then I read what was tacked on the fringe benefits. Hell, you got to work 9 steps. I said, my God, 9 steps. I started working the steps. And I told my sponsor, I said, I've worked them to the best of my ability. He said, now I believe your ability has increased somewhat over the first time that I met you. So with your current ability, what I want you to do is start over. And see if these steps will not have a little bit more meaning in your life. I don't know what I'd have done if I hadn't have done that. I don't know. That man told me, he said, I'm not in this to win a popularity contest. I'm not in this to be your friend. I can eventually become your friend. But I'm in this thing with you to help you save your butt. And we're going to do it if you're willing to work for it. God, he was tough. And I loved him. I do today. Because it wouldn't have worked any other way for me. And I had to work those steps the way the book says. And when I got through, and see, he's the kind of guy. He is the kind of guy that went with you to make amends. I mean, banknotes. See, he's driving a station wagon about as long as 2 tables like this. And he parked in front of the bank with 2 wheels up on the sidewalk. He said, go see the man. I had 13 banknotes in that bank. Some of them business, some of them personal, some of them had been consolidated. He said, go tell him you're going to pay him. I said, how am I going to pay him? He said, monthly. So I went and told him. It took me 5.5 years to pay this man, but he'd been a friend of mine and I took advantage of him. At first he didn't want to see me, but later I told him I had to pay him. And I paid him every cent that I owed him. And, a few years ago I had to borrow a large amount of money, and this man was my reference. He was my credit reference. He said, if he says he'll pay you, he'll pay you. He became a friend again, a close friend. My sponsor knew what he was doing. I'd stolen some money from a guy. And he said, we're going to pay him back. I said, hell, he don't know about it. He don't know it. He said, yeah, but you do, because it's on that pad. We ain't doing it for him. We're doing it for you. And so he got half of the money, and I went over and gave the guy half of it. And you tell him you'll be back and give him the other half and explain it to him. And I went back and I told him, I said, this money is rightfully yours. I took it from you, and I'm trying to live a life now that requires me to be honest. And I'm returning to you what's yours. And if I owe you any interest, I want to pay you that too. And he looked at me and he said, I've never heard of anything like that. I said, me either. Later on in my life, that guy became a part of my life, and my daughter bought a house from him, and he gave her a big break, and she didn't have to have a lot of money because he said, if your daddy will stand for it, I'm good. He said, I'd rather have his word than most people's money. A judge there in my hometown, I had to make amends to him. He was a special guy in my life. When I was a kid, he sponsored me in the Y. He introduced me to my wife. He sponsored me in the JCs. He sponsored me in Civitan. He helped me get into business. And then I came before him for a few things and a few reasons and a few charges. And he put his credibility on the line. And he gnawed across cases and he threw them out of court. And finally they were so numerous that one day I stood before him and he gave me an active sentence. I said, I can't believe this. I kept waiting for him to say suspended. He ain't said suspended yet. Kept waiting for him. They got me out there to this camp. And I said, well, they'll be going to let me cool off for 3 or 4 days. They'll be out here to get me. They didn't come. They didn't come. I served the time out there, and I hated that man. I hated his guts. Every waking minute. And I put him at the top of my resentment. And my sponsor said, you can't do that. I said, I can because he's there. He said, we got to get some forgiveness. And he said, we got to go to him and you got to tell him that you don't have any hard feelings. I said, you told me to be honest. He said, we're going to make an exception in this case. He wrote out what I was to say. He said, you practice this. And those words, I can remember them now. Your Honor, I know that you did what you had to do and what was necessary, and I just want you to know that I don't have any hard feelings toward you. And I said, God, I can't do that. That man took 6 months of my damn life away from me. He said, you're going to do it. And I went in, and he was standing outside the judge's chambers. And I walked in, and I told that judge that. And when I got through telling him what I told him, he started crying. And when he started crying, I started crying. And when I started crying, I knew that I'd meant what I said. I knew that I'd meant it, and I knew that that was the end of pride in my life. I knew that that the wall was gone. And I didn't have anything else to hide from anybody. And I went home, and I studied the first 9 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. And for the first time in my life, I was a free man. God, I walked those streets. I walked those streets, and I didn't have to dodge a soul. I didn't have to go around the block. I could look anybody in the eye. I could go anywhere. What a feeling. What a feeling this gave me. That feeling of freedom. And I'm glad that the book talks about that. I'm glad that the book talks about a new freedom. It says we are going to know a new freedom. And it was brand new for me. I thought that I was free when I got out of Dix Hill, or free when I got out of prison. I wasn't free. Hell, I was just loose. I was a prisoner within me. My thoughts and my values and my beliefs and my ideas and that thinking of them had me imprisoned within myself, and nothing good within me could emerge. But my book tells me deep down in every man, woman, child is a basic fundamental of God. And it's there. And when I got all of that crap out in steps 4 and 5 and started working on it in 6, 7 and made amends in 8 and 9, the good things started emerging in my life. And I had some character, something that I wanted badly. You know, I used to hear those old-timers stand up, and I don't hear it too much anymore. And they said, this program has allowed me to walk with dignity and pride. And I said, my God, it's been so long since I've had any dignity, since I've had any pride. I want that. I envy them of that. Today I have no envy. I have no envy because the program of Alcoholics Anonymous has given me dignity. And it's given me pride. It's restored to me the things that are rightful that God wanted me to have. It's made me a human being again. It's returned me to what the book says I'm going to be of maximum service to God and the people about me. I know a new happiness today. I'm glad they put new on that too, because I always equated laughter with happiness. And it has little to do with happiness. Has very little. I can tell the biggest SOB in the world a joke and he'll laugh. But he ain't happy, baby. I'll guarantee you that. But today, because of the program of Alcoholics Anonymous and a loving sponsor and people like you and the grace of God, I learned what happiness was. I've learned what happiness was. Accepting me for what I am. And accepting you for what you are. And being content with what I have. And you gave me a formula for happiness. You said if you can give of yourself and forgive others and live with a grateful heart, you don't have to look for happiness. It'll come looking for you. And it looks for me. And it searches me out every day through people like you all over the world. The program of Alcoholics Anonymous has given me an awful lot. My daddy, I won't tell you about my daddy. Hated him. I was told to pray for him. I prayed for him. It wasn't much to begin with. It's God bless him. Then I could say, God bless him and mean it. Then I say, God bless him and take care of him. And then finally I found myself asking that he forgive me because I had in my heart forgiven him. And I knew that everything was all right between my daddy and I. Hadn't seen him in 15, 16 years. 19 years ago, my daddy died. And I went to his funeral, my wife and my sister and I. It was down in South Carolina. And we got there an hour before the funeral. And we were allowed to go in and see him. And my daddy, instead of the traditional handkerchief in his pocket, had a Serenity prayer pen there. He'd been sober 3 months when he died. And you gave him the same opportunity that you gave me. Now, if I had not had that forgiveness, and I had not forgiven, if I'd have walked in there, Mr. AA, and saw what had happened to him, I couldn't have handled that. But I handled it the way that Alcoholics Anonymous tells me to handle it. And I thank you for what you did to my dad and for him. And on the way home, my little sister said, ask questions. And the book tells me it's been freely given to you. Speak freely of it. And I told her about God's grace and what the program had done for my wife and I. And my sister called me a few years ago and she said, I want to be like you. I've got a problem. And you took my sister. And she had 2 years sobriety in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous down in Florida. And then she got a lot of money and she went out and she drank again and she came back. She had brain damage. She was broke. Everything was broken spiritually, mentally, and physically. And you took her and you said, we love you. My sister's sober today with all of her handicaps. She's sober by God's grace and through your love. And I thank you for what you did for her. You did for her exactly what you did for me. You accepted me at face value. And you told me some truths. And all I had to do was follow directions. What a life. What a life. I don't have to envy anybody today, because today I have it. I have that dignity. And I have that pride, and it's a gift. The grace of God. He gave it to me, and I want to close and tell you about him. He treated me pretty much like he did another guy in the Bible. You know, there's a guy in the Bible that wanted his way. He wanted his free will. He wanted his freedom. And he said, okay, go ahead and do it. And this guy went out and spent all of his money on riotous living, and he spent it all, and he ended up eating with the pigs, and he came home, and the people didn't want him there. And his father came out and said, this is my son. Kill the calf. We're going to have a feast. That's the prodigal son. And God gave me the same chance. He gave me a free will. And he gave me an awful lot, and I blew it. And I fell time after time after time. And every time I fell, he picked me up. And then finally, that last time, when I felt that I was undeserving of anything, of even asking him for anything, I asked one more time. And what did he do? He picked me up one more time. And he put his arm around me, and he said he loved me. And like the prodigal son, he gave me a gift. The greatest gift that can be given an alcoholic of my type. He gave me the gift to be a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. God, what a magnificent gift. And along with it, he gave me 1 million people just like you to help me enjoy it. God bless you.